The storm outside my Seattle window was merciless. Rain hammering the glass like angry fists, thunder shaking the walls. On the coffee table, my sapphire engagement ring glittered with every flash of lightning. But to me, it looked like a polished lie. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't pleading. Tonight I was planning. Because 19 seconds, that's all it took. A single voice memo sent to the wrong person had shattered 6 years of love and revealed the truth. To him, I wasn't a partner. I was pathetic. What he didn't know was this: pathetic doesn't break, pathetic transforms. And by sunrise, Connor Whitaker would finally understand what happens when the woman he tried to destroy stops being afraid. If you've ever felt dismissed, betrayed, or made to feel invisible, or maybe you've experienced the deepest loneliness, or that unbearable pain of losing those you love most, share it. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because maybe the next story will remind you of your own strength. The storm outside my Seattle window was merciless. Rain hammering the glass like angry fists, thunder rattling picture frames on the wall. Each strike of lightning illuminated the hollow shell of my apartment, a place that once felt like home, but now pulsed like a prison. On the coffee table, the sapphire engagement ring sparkled defiantly with every flash, as if mocking me. To the world, it was a promise. To me, it was a polished lie. I sat cross-legged on the floor, my laptop humming, the cursor blinking on an empty document. My fingers hovered above the keys, trembling but steady in their intent. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't begging for explanations. Tonight wasn't about grief. It was about architecture. I was designing the collapse of the man who thought I was too weak to fight back. 19 seconds. That was all it had taken. A voice memo that wasn't meant for me but found me anyway, like fate itself had grown tired of my silence. His voice still echoed in my skull. She's pliable, pathetic when managed right. The word pathetic replayed like a chant, each repetition hardening something in me I didn't know existed. I looked up at the darkened window and caught my own reflection. Wet streaks traced my cheeks where tears had dried, my eyes sunken but sharper than I remembered. A bruise still shadowed the edge of my throat, nearly invisible in the dim light. I traced it with my fingertips, not with shame, but with clarity. For months I had shrunk myself, folding my opinions away, sanding down the edges of who I was to fit inside Connor's carefully drawn box. I thought it was love. I thought it was compromise. But now, sitting alone in the storm, I realized it was erasure. And I was done being erased. The ring caught another flash of lightning. I picked it up, cold metal pressing into my palm, and felt nothing. No dream, no promise, no future. Just the weight of a lie. I set it back down, deliberately, the click echoing louder than the thunder outside. My laptop screen glowed brighter, pulling me forward. The plan had already begun to sketch itself in my mind. 9 a.m., the first email. Noon, the second. Each carefully timed, each carrying proof he thought I was too broken to keep. By sunset tomorrow, Connor Whitaker's carefully curated life, the job, the prestige, the spotless reputation, would begin to crack. I leaned back against the wall, a thin smile curling despite the ache in my chest. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he'd built me into something disposable. What he didn't realize was that he had built his own reckoning. And as the ferry horn bellowed across Elliott Bay, cutting through the storm like a warning bell, I whispered to myself, by sunrise, Connor will finally understand what happens when the woman he tried to destroy stops being afraid. The storm outside eased for a moment, leaving only the steady drumming of rain on the window. My apartment felt unnervingly silent, until I replayed it again. That cursed memo. 19 seconds. I pressed the phone to my ear, the screen casting a pale light across my face. Connor's voice bled into the room, smooth, relaxed, almost playful. Yeah, Paige, you're right. She's not who she used to be. She's pliable now. Pathetic when managed right. Pathetic. There it was again, the word that cut deeper than any bruise. The word that rewrote every fight, every apology, every moment I'd begged him to see me. My chest tightened, heat prickling up my neck. I could almost hear my own heartbeat pulsing against the rain. I replayed it once more, like some kind of masochist, each syllable stabbing into me. His tone wasn't angry, wasn't stressed. He was calm, amused, proud of what he'd done to me. She used to argue, remember? Challenge me. But now? Now she asks permission to breathe. I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. Permission to breathe. My reflection in the window stared back, eyes wide, hollow, furious. Had I really become that ghost? Flashes of memory assaulted me. Connor criticizing my dress at dinner, his hand tightening around my wrist. The way I'd flinched when he raised his voice, even when he wasn't close enough to touch me. I had justified it all. Stress, long hours, pressure at work. I had told myself love meant patience. But this memo stripped away every excuse. This was who he really was when he thought I couldn't hear him. A new voice broke through the recording. Paige's. Soft, hesitant, but complicit. If you're that unhappy, maybe you should just end it. She'll fall apart without you. The memo ended with a beep, but the silence that followed was louder than the storm. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from clarity. His sister saw me as fragile. He saw me as pathetic. To them, my collapse was inevitable. I placed the phone on the coffee table next to the ring, both glowing in the lightning's flash. Two objects that once represented love and family now symbolized betrayal. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow me. 6 years of my life, reduced to a cruel inside joke between the man I loved and his sister. But then, slowly, something shifted inside. A cold resolve replaced the shaking in my hands. If they think I'll fall apart, they don't know me at all. I opened my laptop, the blue light washing over my face like a stage spotlight. My fingers hovered, then began typing. Not frantic, but precise. Dates, times, incidents, words he'd thrown at me like knives. Proof I'd collected even when I still believed I'd never use it. This wasn't just about leaving anymore. This was about exposure, about consequences. I leaned forward, whispering into the storm as if he could hear me through the walls. Pathetic doesn't break. Pathetic transforms. And tomorrow, Connor Whitaker will learn exactly what that means. The rain softened into a mist against the glass, but inside my apartment the storm still raged. I sat frozen, my laptop open, the voice memo replaying in my mind like a cruel lullaby. For the first time, I saw myself the way Connor described. Me, pliable, diminished, a ghost of who I once was. My gaze drifted to the mirror hanging on the wall near the entryway. At first, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, her shoulders curved inward as if she'd been trying for months to take up less space. Strands of hair clung damply to her temples, and a faint bruise ghosted the curve of her throat. That was the woman Connor thought he had created. The one he paraded like a trophy, sculpted by his criticisms and his control. But as I stared longer, something shifted. My reflection wasn't just broken, it was split. On one side, there was the before Nora, the girl who laughed too loudly at college parties, who had once challenged Connor to a debate on politics in front of half their classmates and won. She had been bold, unapologetic, alive. On the other side was the after Nora, silent, careful, her words filtered through the sieve of Connor's approval. She had learned to whisper rather than shout, to apologize before she even understood what for. She had become the pliable version he bragged about in that memo. And yet, between the two versions, in the cracks where pain and clarity met, something new was forming. A third Nora. Not naive, not pliable, but forged by betrayal into something sharper. I leaned closer to the mirror, studying the faint smile that pulled at my lips. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was dangerous. The cursor blinked on the screen behind me, demanding action. My fingers found the keyboard again, this time without hesitation. I began sketching out the plan in a series of cold bullet points. 9 a.m. Email to Catherine Walsh, Connor's supervisor, with photo evidence. 12 p.m. Forwarded memo with subject line, integrity. 3 p.m. Social media post, subtle but undeniable. Each step was deliberate, surgical. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. Connor believed he'd erased me, that he'd replaced the bold woman he met with someone docile, someone disposable. But he hadn't destroyed me. He'd only buried me under layers of fear and self-doubt. Now, as I sat in the glow of the screen, I felt her clawing back to the surface, the woman who once looked a man like Connor in the eye and refused to flinch. Only this time, she was armed with evidence. I turned back to the window, lightning illuminating the reflection of both versions of myself. The before, the after, and now, the becoming. I whispered into the dim room, a vow not just to myself, but to the storm. He thinks he knows who I am. By tomorrow, he'll learn I'm someone he should never have underestimated. The glow of my laptop dimmed as another memory forced its way to the surface. It was like my mind wanted to torture me, dragging me back to the beginning. When Connor's world felt like a fairy tale, I was lucky enough to step into. I could still smell the coffee from that first morning we moved into the apartment on First Avenue, just a block from Pike Place Market. The sun had spilled through the wide windows, painting the hardwood floors in liquid gold. Connor had stood there with his arm around my waist, his green eyes bright as the bay beyond us. "Perfect for my perfect girl," he whispered, pressing his forehead against mine. His cologne, sandalwood and something sharp, distinctly him, wrapped around me like a promise. Back then, every detail felt like fate. The granite countertops, the view of the ferries gliding across Elliott Bay, even the way the space echoed slightly when we laughed. After 3 years of long distance, of late-night FaceTimes and countdowns to weekend visits, this was supposed to be our triumph, our beginning. I remembered the first month as a blur of domestic bliss. Connor bringing me coffee in bed, steam curling into the cold morning air, his laughter filling the kitchen as he guided my hands through his grandmother's pasta recipe. Nights spent tangled on the couch, black and white movies flickering against our skin. He would look at me then, his voice low and certain. "I love you, Nora Bennett." And my heart would race like it was the first time. It was easy, dangerously easy, to believe in that version of us. To believe that love could be so complete, so absolute. But even then, the shadows were creeping in. I remembered one evening, weeks after we'd settled in. I came out of the bedroom in a yellow sundress scattered with white flowers, my favorite, the one that always made me feel bright. He glanced up from his phone, his smile faltering. "You're wearing that." My laugh died in my throat. "What's wrong with it?" He softened instantly, too quickly. "Nothing. It's just, we're going to Meridian. It's a nice place. Maybe something more sophisticated?" I changed. Black cocktail dress, makeup heavier than I liked. When I stepped out, his eyes lit up, approval shining like a spotlight. "There's my beautiful fiancé." And just like that, the hook slid deeper, the memories blurred, him ordering for me at dinner, brushing off my protests with a laugh. "I know what you like, Nora." The salmon I hated arrived on my plate. and I ate it anyway because his hand was warm over mine and his voice was honey when he wanted it to be. Looking back now, in the glow of my laptop and the echo of that voice memo, I could see it all for what it was. Not love, not care, conditioning. Subtle edits to who I was until I didn't recognize the woman staring back in the mirror. The golden light of that apartment had dimmed into shadows long before tonight's storm. I just hadn't been willing to see it. I closed my eyes, the sound of fairies in the distance dragging me back to the present. The trap had been set years ago, wrapped in love and sunlight. But tomorrow, I would be the one springing it. It started small, so small I convinced myself I was imagining it. A half smile that didn't reach his eyes when I spoke too freely at a dinner party. A sigh when I grabbed the wrong brand of pasta sauce. A quick correction when I mispronounced a colleague's last name in front of him. It's nothing, I told myself. He's just tired. He wants the best for me. But the small cuts stacked, one by one, until they carved trenches I couldn't climb out of. At first it was the clothes. He would tilt his head and say, "That dress is cute, but maybe a little juvenile. You'd look stunning in something sleeker." And I'd change, because the way his eyes softened afterward felt like winning. Then it was money. Groceries too expensive. Towels unnecessary. "I'm building something here, Nora," he snapped once, waving a credit card statement like a weapon. "Don't make me feel like I'm doing it alone." I remember the sting of tears in my eyes as I nodded, ashamed for reasons I couldn't even name. The next time, I paid in cash from my own account, thinking it would help. He still found fault. The milk was too pricey, the bananas too ripe, nothing was ever just right. The isolation crept in quietly. He said Luna, my best friend since college, was a bad influence, too independent, too opinionated. Slowly, our coffee dates became fewer, my excuses more practiced. "I'm just tired from work," I'd text, while Connor looked over my shoulder, satisfied. The first time his voice snapped into something sharp and unfamiliar, I actually stepped back. His face flushed red as he slammed the receipt down. $200 at Target? "What the hell are you even buying?" "Groceries," I whispered. "Some things for the apartment. We already have towels, Nora. We don't need to waste money." The word waste burned. He saw me not as a partner, but as a liability. When I flinched at the sound of paper hitting the counter, his expression shifted instantly, melting into apology. His hands cupped mine, thumbs circling softly. "I'm not mad, baby. I'm just stressed. You understand, right?" And God help me, I did. Or at least, I told myself I did. But the apologies became as scripted as the outbursts. Each correction, each criticism, each little shove into silence was followed by tenderness so intoxicating it erased the pain. Or maybe I wanted it to. Then came the first bruise. He grabbed my wrist during an argument, fingers digging too deep. The marks bloomed purple over the next few days, a secret map of his temper hidden under sleeves and bracelets. He swore it was an accident, his eyes wet with guilt. "You know I'd never hurt you." I believed him, because the alternative, that the man I loved chose to hurt me, was too terrible to face. But the accidents multiplied. A shove in the kitchen when I pressed too hard, an elbow in my ribs when I followed him into the living room, each time followed by soft words, tears, promises. It was a ladder I didn't realize I was climbing, rung by rung. From the jokes that cut, to the corrections that silenced, to the bruises I learned to hide. Until one night, when his hand struck across my face so fast I tasted blood, and the sound echoed in our apartment like a gunshot. I pressed my palm to my cheek, staring at him in shock, at the man who once whispered promises under golden light. And in that silence, I felt it. The exact moment fear became something else. The bruise on my cheek had faded by now, but the memory hadn't. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I could still hear it, the sharp crack of skin meeting skin, the stunned silence after. That sound lived inside me, and it followed my eyes down to the ring glinting on the coffee table, its sapphire catching the storm's lightning as if mocking me. That ring had once been everything. Connor on the rooftop, stars scattered across the Seattle sky like diamonds spilled from heaven. His hand shaking slightly as he slipped the sapphire onto my finger. His voice soft, reverent. "Forever, Nora." Back then, it had felt like destiny. Now it felt like shackles. I leaned closer, watching the gem sparkle, and realized the truth. This ring wasn't proof of love. It was proof of ownership, a brand, a reminder that he had sculpted me into the pliable, obedient version of myself he bragged about. My hand hovered above it, trembling, not from longing, but from rage. I picked it up, holding it to the light. The sapphire refracted blue across the walls, cold and sharp like a blade. I thought of the memo. Pathetic when managed right. I smiled bitterly. If Connor only knew how wrong he was. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a small velvet box I hadn't touched since the proposal. Inside were scraps of a past life, dried flower petals from that night, a champagne cork, a folded napkin with forever written in his handwriting. I laid the ring inside, snapping a photo with my phone. Not for nostalgia, for evidence, because symbols could speak louder than words, and I planned to use every symbol he'd handed me. I imagined Catherine Walsh at Rainier Capital opening her inbox tomorrow morning, not just reading my email, not just seeing the bruise photo, but staring at the very ring that represented the man she trusted to court million-dollar clients. A man who wore integrity like a tailored suit, while bruising the woman he swore to love. The cursor blinked on my screen, waiting. I dropped the photo into a folder labeled simply, Truth, the first of many files I would send. The storm outside cracked again, and for a second I swore the thunder rolled in rhythm with my heartbeat. I closed the velvet box and set it deliberately on the nightstand, where Connor would see it the moment he woke. No note, no goodbye. Just the symbol of what he'd destroyed, stripped of meaning, weaponized into evidence. I pressed my palm flat against the wood, steady, calm. For the first time in months, I felt clarity cut through the fog. The ring wasn't a reminder of the life I'd lost. It was the trigger for the reckoning he never saw coming. By morning, the sapphire would no longer bind me. It would bury him. The storm had blown itself out by morning, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. But inside my hotel room, the air was charged, heavy with anticipation. I hadn't slept. My body thrummed with a restless energy, my mind replaying every word of that memo, every slap, every bruise. The sapphire ring sat in its velvet box on the nightstand. The diamond caught the pale dawn light like an icy eye, watching, waiting. Connor would wake soon and see the empty space beside him. The missing suitcase, the ring left like a gravestone. But before that moment, the first strike had to land. I sat at the small desk, coffee steaming beside me, laptop open. The cursor blinked at the top of a drafted email. I read it once more, steadying my breath. Every sentence had been weighed, sharpened, stripped of emotion but heavy with truth. Subject: concerning conduct of employee, Connor Whitaker. Dear Ms. Walsh, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Nora Bennett, and until this morning, I was engaged to your associate, Connor Whitaker. I am writing to share deeply troubling information regarding his behavior in private life, behavior that stands in direct contradiction to Rainier Capital's stated values of integrity and respect. Over the past year, Connor has engaged in repeated psychological and physical abuse. I have documentation, including photographs of injuries and audio recordings, that reveal his true thoughts about women, including his own fiancée. I am not seeking personal vengeance. I am seeking accountability. I believe a man representing your firm should embody the values you advertise. Attached are 2 files. A photograph of bruising from one incident. A photo of the engagement ring he once presented as a promise of forever. I now present it as evidence of betrayal. I trust you will treat this matter with the seriousness it demands. Regards, Nora Bennett. My finger hovered over the trackpad. For one heartbeat, fear whispered, what if no one believes me? What if this only makes things worse? But then I remembered his voice, smooth and smug. She's pliable. Pathetic when managed, right? I clicked send. The whoosh of the email leaving was louder than the thunder from the night before. My chest tightened, then loosened, air rushing in as if I'd been holding my breath for months. It was done. The first stone had been thrown, and I knew exactly where the ripples would spread. To his supervisor, to HR, to the clients who praised Rainier Capital's zero-tolerance policies. Connor's spotless reputation had just been cracked, and the fracture would only deepen. I leaned back in the chair, a thin smile tugging at my lips. Outside, the streets of Seattle bustled with ordinary life. Commuters, buses, ferries crossing the bay. But for Connor Whitaker, the day would not be ordinary. By 9:01 a.m., the world he had built so carefully was already beginning to unravel. By late afternoon, the city had shifted beneath a pale, bruised sky. I sat in a corner booth at a cafe near harbor steps, laptop open but untouched, my nerves buzzing with restless anticipation. The email had gone out at 9 a.m., and since then my phone had lit up with missed calls, half a dozen voicemails from Connor, each more frantic than the last. I ignored them all. Then a new message arrived. Unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Harbor Steps Cafe. 1 hour. Come alone. Paige. For a long moment I stared at the screen. Paige Whitaker, Connor's older sister, the one from the voice memo. The one who'd called me fragile. Was this a trap? Was Connor using her to reel me back in, to gaslight me into silence? Still, curiosity and the faintest thread of hope tugged at me. If anyone knew the real Connor, it was her. When I arrived, Paige was already waiting. She sat hunched over a coffee cup, her dark hair pulled back loosely, her eyes red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept in days. When she saw me, she stood quickly, almost knocking the cup over. Nora, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I slid into the booth across from her, arms folded, my guard up. Why am I here, Paige? Did Connor send you? Her laugh was bitter, hollow. If he knew I was here, he'd never forgive me. No, this is me, just me. And I need to say I'm sorry. The words caught me off guard. Sorry? She nodded, tears brimming. For not seeing it sooner. For encouraging him to end things instead of encouraging him to get help. For calling you pathetic. The air between us tightened. Hearing the word aloud again felt like a blade reopening the wound. But her eyes held no malice, only regret. I thought you'd changed, she whispered. At first I told myself you two just weren't compatible, that you'd lost yourself in the relationship. But then I saw you at Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner. You barely spoke. You flinched when he snapped at you for spilling wine on your dress. You used to be so confident, Nora. That night you looked terrified. My throat tightened, but I stayed silent, letting her speak. After that, Paige continued, I started paying attention, and I realized it wasn't incompatibility. It was abuse. I've seen patients' families with the same signs, Nora. I'm a doctor. I should have known. She pulled out her phone, sliding it across the table. A list of audio files filled the screen, each one dated, each labeled Connor. I recorded our calls, she said, her voice steady now. For weeks. The things he admitted, the way he talked about you when he thought no one else was listening. It's all here. If you want it, it's yours. I stared at the phone, my pulse quickening. Proof. Not just my words, not just my bruises. His own sister, armed with his confessions. Paige's hand trembled as she pulled the phone back. I can't undo what I've said before, but I can help now. I will help now. You're not alone in this, Nora. Not anymore. For the first time in months, I felt the icy weight on my chest crack, just slightly. An ally had stepped out of the shadows, and this time, it was someone Connor never expected. The Whitaker family gala was supposed to be flawless, an annual display of wealth and reputation, staged beneath the glittering chandeliers of the Seattle Art Museum. Connor had boasted about it for weeks, the guest list stacked with CEOs, politicians, and donors who saw him as the golden boy of Rainier Capital. But tonight, he had no idea the ground beneath his polished shoes was about to collapse. From the mezzanine, hidden among the crowd, I watched him work the room. Perfect suit, easy smile, that charming handshake he'd perfected since college. To everyone here, he was the picture of success. To me, he was a mask stretched over rot. I gripped the glass of sparkling water in my hand, pulse steady. The plan had already been set in motion hours before, a carefully timed leak. Paige had delivered her recordings discreetly, and I'd sent them, not to gossip sites, not to tabloids, but to the very board members Rainier Capital relied on for credibility. Men and women who valued image above all. And now, at precisely 8:45 p.m., the first phone buzzed. I watched Catherine Walsh, his supervisor, glance down at her screen. Her expression shifted. Shock, then a flash of disgust. Another board member leaned over, whispering urgently. Across the room, 3 men in tailored suits began scrolling through their phones, their faces paling in unison. Connor's smile faltered. He adjusted his tie, confusion flickering across his features. Why aren't they looking at me the same way? The murmurs spread like wildfire. I could almost hear Paige's recording spilling from phone to phone, Connor's voice dripping with arrogance. She's pliable, pathetic when managed right. I can't respect a woman who doesn't fight back. If I hit her, she provokes me. The crowd's energy shifted. What had been admiration soured into scrutiny. Guests who had been eager to shake his hand suddenly kept their distance. Catherine approached, her posture rigid, her voice low but sharp. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the way Connor's jaw clenched, his smile collapsing under the weight of reality. Then, the moment came. Catherine turned, raised her voice just enough to cut through the hum of conversation. Rainier Capital has zero tolerance for this kind of conduct. Mr. Whitaker, consider yourself relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Gasps rippled across the gallery. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered against the marble floor. Connor stood frozen, color draining from his face. For the first time, his confidence cracked in public view. The mask was gone. He looked around the room, desperate, searching for an ally. But even his parents turned away, shame etched across their features. From my shadowed corner, I let the scene wash over me. This was only the beginning, the public shattering of the man who had built his life on control and cruelty. Connor Whitaker had always believed consequences were for other people. Tonight, under the glare of chandeliers and whispers of power, he finally learned they were for him too. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, but the tension inside was electric. Rows of benches filled with reporters, activists, and strangers leaning forward, hungry for the spectacle. The fall of Connor Whitaker, once the darling of Seattle's financial world, was now headline fodder. I sat at the witness table, palms pressed against my knees to steady the tremor in them. Across the aisle, Connor leaned in toward his attorney, his once polished image now fraying. His hair was unkempt, his jaw shadowed with stubble. Still, he carried himself with the arrogance of a man convinced the world would bend back to him. The judge's gavel cracked the silence. We'll now hear testimony from the complainant, Ms. Nora Bennett. My throat tightened, but I rose. The microphone hummed faintly as I adjusted it, every eye in the room fixed on me. Connor's most of all, green, cold, assessing, as if he could still bend me to silence. I told the truth. About the nights of criticism that chipped away at me until I second-guessed every choice. About the bruises. His hand clamped around my wrist, his elbow in my ribs, the slap that left me reeling. My voice shook at first, but steadied with each word. Connor's lawyer tried to interrupt, his tone smooth. Ms. Bennett, would you agree that Mr. Whitaker was under significant professional stress? That perhaps you misinterpreted certain actions? Misinterpreted? My voice rang louder than I expected, echoing across the wood-paneled room. Are bruises a misinterpretation? Is flinching at the sound of paper hitting a counter-stress? Is a slap across the face a misunderstanding? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even the judge's eyes narrowed. The attorney backed down. Then Paige stepped forward, called by the prosecution. She carried her phone, hands steady, eyes fierce. She looked at her brother once, just once, before playing the recordings aloud. Connor's own voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. She's pliable. Pathetic when managed, right? If I hit her, it's because she provokes me. Gasps broke out. Someone cursed under their breath. Connor lunged forward, slamming his palms on the defense table. Those were private conversations. The judge's gavel slammed. Order! But it was too late. The mask had shattered. The jury watched him not as a victim of circumstance, but as the man he truly was, entitled, volatile, unrepentant. I met his eyes one last time. He expected fear. Instead, I gave him silence, steady and unflinching. For the first time, it was him who looked away. When I returned to my seat, Paige's hand brushed mine under the table. A quiet, wordless alliance. Connor Whitaker had spent years building a life on control. In one courtroom afternoon, that foundation cracked under the weight of truth. The courtroom buzzed with whispers long after Paige's recordings faded. The judge had called a short recess, but no one seemed eager to move. The air felt charged, as if everyone sensed the story wasn't finished. Then, the double doors at the back opened. Linda and Richard Whitaker stepped inside, Connor's parents. Regal in their bearing, their presence silenced the gallery. Connor's head snapped toward them, relief flickering across his face. He stood straighter, smoothing his tie, as if their arrival would restore his image. But when his mother's eyes found mine, they didn't soften. They hardened. The judge allowed them to approach as witnesses for the prosecution. Richard's voice was low, gravelly when he began. We hadn't planned to be here. But silence, we've learned, is another form of complicity. Connor shifted uncomfortably. Dad, what are you doing? Linda's gaze cut through him like glass. We're telling the truth, Connor. Finally, the room stilled. Richard continued, pulling a small folder from his jacket. After Nora came forward, we hired a private investigator. What we discovered was devastating. Not just her story, others, many others. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Hospital records, police reports that were never pursued, financial irregularities, a trail of damage stretching back nearly a decade. Gasps rippled across the benches. Connor's face drained of color. You went digging into my life? Into lies. You're supposed to be on my side. Linda's voice broke, but she didn't falter. We were for too long. We believed every excuse, every polished smile. We told ourselves you were stressed, pressured, misunderstood. But the truth, Connor? The truth is we raised a son who learned to charm in public and destroy in private. She turned toward the gallery, her voice steady now. Nora wasn't the first. There was Rebecca in college. Then 2 more after, women who disappeared from his life with shadows in their eyes. We told ourselves they had moved on. But the evidence says otherwise. The gallery erupted, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing. Connor slammed his hands against the table. Stop, you don't know what you're talking about. They're exaggerating. He pointed at me, his voice cracking. She's manipulating everyone. But the words rang hollow. Even his lawyer's shoulders sagged under the weight of betrayal. Richard stepped closer to his son, voice low enough for the microphones but sharp enough to cut. Actions have consequences, Connor. We can't protect you anymore. And we won't. Connor's mouth opened, but no sound came. His parents turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. For the first time, he looked truly alone. I sat frozen, the weight of their confession sinking in. I had thought my battle was personal, me versus him. But this was larger. A pattern, a history, a legacy of harm unraveling in public. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Court will reconvene, and with this new evidence, the charges will expand. Connor lowered his head, shoulders shaking. Not with remorse, but with the dawning realization that every mask had been ripped away. And for the first time, I believed justice wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Weeks later, the courthouse steps were lined with cameras, their lenses glinting in the pale Seattle sunlight. Connor Whitaker had just been sentenced. 5 years in prison, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order. His name, once a badge of prestige, now lived in headlines as a cautionary tale. But this story wasn't about him anymore. When I stepped out of those courthouse doors, I wasn't the same woman who had once whispered apologies just to keep the peace. The air felt different in my lungs, lighter, sharper, alive. Paige walked beside me, her hand brushing mine, a quiet reminder that allies can come from unexpected places. Behind us, his parents spoke softly with reporters, announcing a new foundation dedicated to domestic violence survivors. From the ashes of their son's downfall, they had chosen to build something that might save lives. And me? I had chosen something too. Not silence, not shame, but voice. 6 months later, I stood before a crowded hall at the launch of that foundation, a microphone steady in my hand. Faces filled the room, survivors, advocates, strangers who believed in change. My story no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a weapon sharpened into purpose. Abuse doesn't always look like broken bones, I told them. Sometimes it's invisible scars, chipped away piece by piece, until you forget who you are. But here's the truth. You are never too broken to rebuild. And you are never alone. Applause rose. But what mattered were the tears glistening in strangers' eyes. A young woman in the front row clutched her notebook as if the words themselves were lifelines. I recognized that look. I had worn it once. Later that night, she approached me, her voice shaking. Your story gave me the courage to leave. I thought I was weak, but now I think I might be stronger than I realized. I held her hands tightly. You are, I said, with a conviction I'd once doubted in myself, because that was the legacy. Not Connor's fall, but the rising of voices like hers, like mine, like Rebecca's, like all the women who had once been silenced. The rain began again outside, tapping against the tall windows of the hall. But this time it didn't sound like fists on glass. It sounded like renewal, like a storm that had passed and left the ground fertile for something new. I looked into the crowd one last time, my heart steady, my voice clear. Some betrayals carve you hollow, but hollow spaces can be filled again, with strength, with truth, with light. If you're listening tonight and you feel small, remember this. You are not broken. You are becoming. The applause thundered. But inside me, there was only stillness. Peace. For the first time in years, I felt whole.